Everything Neville Goddard taught, imagination, assumption, living in the end, revision, was never meant to be separate ideas. It was one system, and that's what this video breaks down. Not just another explanation of his ideas, but the complete framework. Everything Neville taught connected into one model in the order it actually works. And it starts with one question: what is reality? Most of us grow up believing something very simple: the world out there creates our experience. So if the business is going well, we feel confident. If someone compliments us, we feel happy. If we lose money, we feel stressed. In other words, life happens first, our thoughts and feelings happen second. And that feels obvious, it's just how almost everyone sees the world. Neville completely flips that idea upside down. According to him, the outside world isn't the cause, it's the effect. Now, before your brain starts arguing with that, let's use a simple example. Imagine you're sitting in a movie theater, you're watching a film on a giant screen. Suddenly something appears on a screen that you don't like. Maybe the colors are wrong, maybe the picture is a bit blurry. What would be the most ridiculous solution? Walking up to the screen and trying to fix it? Like you could wipe the screen, paint over it, yell at it, nothing changes because the screen isn't producing the movie, it's only displaying it. And if you actually want to change what appears on the screen, you have to change what's happening inside the projector. Neville says reality works the same way. The world you experience is the screen, your imagination is the projector. Most people, however, spend their lives trying to change the screen. Neville says change the projector. Now this is where usually people misunderstand him. They hear this and they think, oh, I just have to be positive all the time. That's not what Neville was talking about. He was pointing somewhere deeper. If the outside world is only the screen, the thing being shown, not the thing doing the showing, then something inside of you has to be the actual projector. Neville gives that something a name: imagination. But that immediately raises another question, that if imagination is the projector, what exactly inside imagination is doing the creating? Because surely everyone imagines things, people daydream all the time, people fantasize, people worry and paint impossible situations, but not every random thought becomes reality. So what's the difference? Which brings us to Neville's second principle, in which he says it's not imagination by itself which creates reality, it's assumption. At first, those two words sound almost identical, but Neville treats them as completely different things. By the way, what I'm sharing isn't just theory, it's what took me from being a lawyer to starting my own companies, making six figures in my mid-20s and later negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. Now, I'll give you an example to explain what I'm saying. Think about the last time you booked a vacation. The moment you clicked confirm booking, something shifted. You didn't teleport to the beach, you still woke up the next morning, went to work, nothing outside changed, but inside the trip had already felt real. Like you caught yourself thinking, when I get there, not if I go. Your mind had already moved into the future before your body did. That's the difference Neville is pointing toward. Imagining is visiting, assuming is living there. One is temporary, the other becomes a part of your identity. This is why Neville rarely told people to simply imagine more. Instead, he constantly talked about assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Notice the word feeling. This is another place where people get confused because they think feeling means just excitement or intense emotion or just trying to stay happy all day. But think about something you already have, like your name, your age, or the house that you live in. You probably don't feel excited about those things every single morning. You simply know they're true, they're familiar, and they're normal. That's the feeling Neville is talking about, not emotional intensity, naturalness. I'll give you an example. Imagine someone who got engaged yesterday. They're probably excited. But imagine that same person 20 years into a happy marriage. That excitement has settled, but something much deeper has taken its place. Like being married simply feels normal. It's just no longer something they convince themselves of. It's just who they are. Neville says your desired reality has to reach that same point internally. It stops feeling like something you're trying to get. It starts feeling like something that's simply true about your life. And this explains why so many people struggle with manifestation, because they spend all their energy imagining but very little time assuming. So if you remember the projector from earlier, the projector isn't changed by random thoughts, it's changed by the state you consistently occupy. That's Neville's word, state. And assumption is how you enter one. Now naturally a new question appears: if assumption is what actually matters, how do you enter that state in the first place? Because knowing you should assume something is very different from actually doing it, and this is where Neville introduces what is probably his most famous idea, living in the end. Most people hear those words and they imagine something dramatic, like they think they're supposed to spend the entire day pretending like they've achieved their goal, or they have to force themselves to act rich or act successful or act like they're already in the relationship. But after a few hours of doing that, it feels fake and almost exhausting, almost like they're playing a character. And that's not what Neville meant, and I'll explain it with a simple example. Imagine you ordered something online, let's say a laptop. You already paid for it, you got the confirmation email, you know it's on the way. Do you spend the next 5 days wondering whether that happened, whether it exists, or do you keep convincing yourself every hour that you really bought it? No, right? You simply know it's coming because as far as your mind is concerned, the decision has already been made. You're just waiting for reality to catch up. That's much closer to what Neville meant. Living in the end isn't constantly acting, it's mentally reaching the point where the outcome already feels settled. So instead of imagining yourself getting the job, imagine the first evening after you've already been working there for a month. Instead of imagining someone is saying yes to your proposal, imagine the conversation you have a week later. Instead of imagining yourself receiving the money, imagine paying your bills without thinking twice. Notice what's happening. You're skipping the moment of getting the thing and you're moving into the life that naturally follows, because that is where the assumption becomes easiest. Think about your own life. The biggest moments, they usually don't stay exciting forever. Like your first day at school was exciting, but after a few weeks it became normal. Your first paycheck felt exciting, but after years of working, payday simply becomes a part of your life. Neville wants you to mentally move into that second stage, not just the excitement of receiving, the normalness of already having, because that's what assumption feels like. Now something important is, living in the end isn't about fooling yourself, it's not denying what's happening around you. Neville knew your circumstances wouldn't instantly disappear, he knew your senses would still report the same reality. He simply believed your imagination deserved more authority than your current circumstances. And that naturally brings us to the next question, that if you've entered a new assumption, what usually pulls you back? Because almost everyone has experienced this, like you spend 20 minutes visualizing, you genuinely feel different, you close your eyes, you imagine the scene, you feel calm, confident, certain. Then you check your phone, nothing has changed. You check your bank account, same number. You look around, same room, same problems, and within a few minutes, the old way of thinking quietly returns. Neville says this isn't unusual. In fact, he expects it because your senses are constantly telling you a story. They're saying, look around, nothing is different. If nothing is different, then your assumption can't possibly be true. Now, most people believe that story immediately, and without realizing it, they move back into the old state. Notice how every principle keeps connecting to the last one. If the outside world is only the screen, then constantly checking the screen for confirmation doesn't make much sense. You're asking the effect whether the cause is working. Neville would say, stay with the cause, the effect will follow. This is why persistence becomes so important, not because repetition has some magical powers, but because every time you return to the assumed state, you're strengthening the identity that eventually feels natural. Think about learning how to drive. At first, everything feels awkward and you're overwhelmed, like you're looking at every turn, you're checking the mirror, so many things. But a few months later, you drive without thinking. Nothing changed overnight, the repeated experience became natural. Neville believed assumption follows exactly the same pattern. Now, another problem people run into is they hear this and they think, so if I ever have a negative thought, I've just ruined everything. Neville never taught that. He understood people have emotions, they have doubts, they have bad days. The issue isn't whether the doubt appears, the issue is which state do you keep returning to. For example, think about the first time you were trying to learn how to ride a bicycle. Nobody falls once and they say, well, I guess bicycles don't work. Falling is expected, getting back on the bicycle is the whole point. Neville's idea of persistence is exactly that. You notice you've slipped and you gently return again and again until the new state becomes easier than the old one. Which raises another question, that what if today didn't go the way you wanted? For example, what if you reacted badly, had an argument, or made a mistake, or maybe even spent the whole day in fear? Do you simply wait for tomorrow? Neville says no. And this is where one of his most fascinating ideas appears: revision. By the way, if you're finding this valuable, I've done a similar breakdown for Joe Dispenza and Abraham Hicks, connecting their entire teachings into one model like what we're doing here. I will attach the link in the description down below. It's worth checking out after this one. Now, at first, revision sounds almost impossible because people hear it and think, how can I change something that has already happened? Neville's answer is very interesting. He's not asking you to change history, he's asking you to change the version of history your consciousness continues carrying forward. For example, imagine, let's say you had an argument with somebody at work and you're driving home, and without realizing it, you replay the conversation, except this time you think of the perfect comeback or something that you could have said. Then you replay it again, then again, and before going to bed, you probably had the same conversation 20 or 30 times. Your body is tense, you're angry all over again. Nothing actually happened after you left your office, but your imagination kept rehearsing it. Neville simply asks, if imagination is already replaying scenes all day, why not consciously choose a different one? Instead of ending the day with the conversation that actually happened, you imagine it as you wish it had gone, not to lie to yourself, just to choose which version your imagination keeps rehearsing. Now, the important part is, Neville is not asking you to lie to yourself, he's asking which version do you want your imagination rehearsing? Because according to his first principle, imagination is still the projector and every replay matters. If you think about professional athletes, they don't only practice physical movements, many of them mentally rehearse successful performances long before competition. And it's because the brain responds differently to repeated mental experience. Neville applies a similar idea to everyday life. Every night, instead of allowing your imagination to strengthen today's disappointments, use it to strengthen the reality you're choosing instead. Just notice how beautifully this connects to everything we've built. If imagination is the cause, revision changes the cause. If assumption creates reality, revision protects the assumption. If living in the end moves you into a new state, revision helps prevent the old state from pulling you back. Nothing Neville teaches exists on its own. Each principle quietly supports the others. Now I'll show you how it looks like in practice, and this isn't something I'm inventing. It's as close to how Neville himself said he used to do it. At night, before sleeping, get into a relaxed, drowsy state, the kind you're already halfway into right before you doze off. That state matters because your mind is quieter there, less argumentative, and then you pick one small scene, not the whole story of getting what you want, just one moment that could exist only because it's already happened. For example, a friend shaking your hand and congratulating you, or someone saying a line to you that they would only say if it were already true. Make it feel as real as you can, the same way you would feel your hand resting on something solid in front of you. That's the detail that matters, not the size of the scene, how real it feels. If your mind wanders off, which it will, don't force your way through it. Just go back to the beginning of the scene and start again. Neville talked about doing this with something as simple as imagining himself walking up on a gangplank. So he would lose the scene, then he would go back to the first step and walk it again over and over until it felt smooth, until it felt like something he was remembering, not making up. That's the marker, not excitement, familiarity. Then there is the other half. For the day you've already lived, at night, look back at your day. Don't judge it, don't beat yourself up over it. Just look at it plainly, and wherever it went a way you didn't want, whether it's a conversation, a moment, or a mistake, rewrite it. See it happen the way you wished it had, then run that new version in your mind until it settles in, until it starts to feel like what actually happened. That's the whole practice. A scene at night, repeated until it feels familiar, a revised version of the day replayed until it feels real. Now, if you also want a similar breakdown for Joe Dispenza and Abraham Hicks, I've done it for both and I've added the link in the description down below and on your screen, and I'll see you there.